Welcome everyone to Understable Discourse. Hopefully, your soon-to-be go-to source for the best disc golf statistics and analysis. Thank you so much, as always, for being here. Every single time I do one of these episodes, I learn more about myself and what I know and what I don't know. And what I don't know this week is that just because your camera is plugged into a USB port into your power strip doesn't necessarily mean it's connected properly and it's not charging properly. So today we're using the more potato-y camera from the laptop, but I guarantee you that in the future we'll get that fixed for you. So my apologies if we're a little grainy today. But anyway, let's get into it. Today we have a bit of a shorter episode. We're going to take a look back at the Supreme Flight Open that happened this past weekend. We're going to talk about the course a little bit, the winners, some underperformers, overperformers, and that kind of stuff. And then after that, we're going to take a few minutes and talk about the channel, some of the things that we're hoping to achieve this year, and what you can expect from us on a weekly basis. So let's not waste any time and let's get into the 2025 Supreme Flight Open presented by Discraft. Our winners this weekend were, of course, Ella Hansen and Ezra Robinson. Now, this marks Ella's first victory since last year's OTB Open, and as you're all very likely aware, this was Ezra Robinson's first ever Elite Series win. So let's take a look a little bit about how they got there. Ella Hansen started the round 2 strokes back of the leader Holland Handley. Both Macy Veladiaz and Evelina Salonen were tied 1 stroke better than Ella, and it was pretty obvious from the get-go that this was going to come down to who could apply the most pressure without cracking under it themselves. And not long into the round, there was already separation as Evelina and Holland began getting birdies, and every single time that Ella would get a birdie, it was only to cover up a previous bogey that she had taken, so the ground wasn't being made up. However, that's when things started to take a turn. Just as I predicted on last week's show, which, by the way, if you haven't watched, make sure to go check that out, Evelina's biggest issue has always been her putt, and it started to plague her in the middle of the round at the worst time. This was especially problematic because she kept putting herself in position to birdie. In fact, in the final round, Evelina led the field in C1 in regulation, but she had the second worst putting performance of anyone at 46% from C1. Now let me dive into that for a second, just in case it didn't really sink in. The C1 in regulation stat indicates a player reaching circle 1 with 2 strokes remaining for par. Essentially, can you get into C1 and have a birdie look? And Evelina, more than anyone in the final round, was giving herself a chance for birdie, but she just wasn't able to do anything with it. So imagine that you're playing a tournament at a par 3 course, and every single time you throw off the tee, you're landing between 15 and 25 feet from the basket, giving you constant birdie looks. Now imagine that you start missing these putts. And I don't just mean leaving them a bit short. Imagine you're throwing up some air balls. How are you going to feel about that? I know for me, I'm not a big fan. Now amplify that to a point where it's your job and you're an event where you're the defending champion at. With the frustration slowly setting in and stomps happening on certain greens, Holland began to create a degree of separation from Evelina, and it was slowly becoming her event to lose. That is until hole 12 left her scaling down a mountain for her second shot just to end up getting bogey on the hole. And she would then proceed to only get one more birdie on the round as she too struggled to cash birdie putts. This is where Ella's consistency paid off. While she wasn't really getting birdies early in the round, she stopped the leaking and she played consistently from hole 5 onward, carding 6 birdies to close out the round. And this would lead to the most controversial moment for her on hole 18. And that's where she had eagled it in rounds 1 and round 2, but she didn't need an eagle here. A birdie would win the event for her. Now, I'm not sure if she didn't know the score or she felt so confident in her play up to this point, but she decided to go for it anyway, setting it OB and eventually leading to a 3-way tie. This would result in them walking back to the tee of 18 and playing it again. And this time, both Holland and Ella got the eagle, leaving out Evelina. One more time did the trick as Ella eagled the hole for a 4th time during the event to take the win. Now, jumping over to the MPO field, most would agree that this was Anthony Barella's event to lose. Unfortunately, as most also know, AB has put himself in that position numerous times and has sometimes come up short. The name of that here was hole 4 for him, where he took a triple bogey and surrendered a 4-stroke loss to Ezra on one single hole, flipping the positions on the leaderboard and the narrative of the round altogether. However, it wasn't over yet. The lead card was star-studded with Paul McBeth, the six-time world champion beast, Ricky Wysocki, one of the scariest chasers in modern disc golf, and you can hardly say that AB was out of it at that point. Ezra had to fend off monsters. Little did they realize that today was Ezra's day, and his focus could not be broken so easily. You want to know the evidence of that? For the event, Ezra led the field in birdie rate, bogey rate, fairways hit, park percent, C1 in regulation, C2 in regulation, and strokes gained tee to green at 25.67, almost double of anyone else on his card. This man was on a mission. About partway into the round, his brother Isaac hopped on as his caddy, since his round was over, providing a steady hand and an ear to Ezra to talk to. And every single time a card mate missed a hole, Ezra didn't miss a chance. He stepped right on their throat. By hole 14, I think everyone was ready to give Ezra the trophy and just head home. But even then, he decided to go birdie, eagle, birdie, par, birdie to finish the round off. It was truly an incredibly compelling victory to observe, and makes me really wonder what type of season we're going to see from Ezra this year. Could this be the start of something remarkable from him? Could we be seeing a case for him being the more dominant Robinson brother? I think it's a little too early to tell that, but it's something that we're all going to be watching this season. Now let's talk about the course and how it played for everybody. For the FPO this year, the course averaged 3.92 strokes over par, which is up almost 2 strokes from last year. Could this be an indication that the FPO field is getting better? I think so, but this is something that we're going to be tracking throughout the season and talking about in future episodes. The starting stretch of the course seemed to be a very slow stretch for most of the FPO field, leading to an absolute par fest to get the round going. Hole 1 led all other holes in par percentage for all 3 rounds, probably because the tee shot seemed to be the big problem here. Only 13% of the field could get into C1 in regulation off the tee. And that same trend was repeated on hole 2, where only 7.6% made it into C1 in regulation off the tee. Hole 13 is where we saw the biggest change for the FPO field, with them moving the basket to where last year's MPO pin was, and changing a par from a 3 to a 4. And it turned into a solid 4-shot hole that the field had a high birdie rate with. I would probably call this position a good positive change for the FPO, despite it being a pretty negative change for the MPO field. The finishing stretch on the course definitely led to the most drama. By the averages, 16, 17, and 18 were the 3 hardest holes. A very interesting stat is that the overall score distribution on hole 17, even though it surrendered birdies to 21% of the field, another 23% scored par and the rest of the field got bogey or worse. Hole 16 was the only unicorn hole, surrendering just 1 birdie on the entire weekend. Do you know who the person to get that was? I'll give you a hint. She's from Arkansas. Tune in later for another hint to see if you got the question right. Hole 18 was where it all went down for the FPO. Sitting at 680 feet, this par 5 saw the widest range of scores for the field from an eagle 3 to an 8 over 13. Perhaps the dominant performance on this hole came from our winner, Ella Hansen. She ended up playing it 5 times and eagled it 4 out of those times, giving her 8 under on just hole 18 for the weekend. On the MPO side of things, the course averaged only 0.08 strokes over par, easier than last year by almost 2 strokes. Also, as we predicted last week, we had the previous year's hot round beaten and a handful of players shot double digits under par, Ezra topping them out at 12 under. The 2 toughest holes on the course were holes 4 and 16. Seeing hole 4 here, though, isn't a big surprise considering it was last year's hardest hole by far. It averaged 0.58 strokes over par, which was a slight improvement over 2024. This is most likely because they spent some serious time cleaning up the landing zone from the drives. There was a small grouping of bushes and trees that would completely cut players off in their angle if it was just slightly left or right. But this year, that was all cleared out, allowing more players access to the second shot. However, despite that, it still only gave up 16 birdies on the weekend, most famous of which was probably Ezra's blind C2 birdie putt that he made in the final round to pass AB. Hole 16 was the other side of the problem. It averaged 0.57 strokes over par, and despite giving up many more birdies than hole 4, of all the attempts made on the hole over the weekend, 52% of them ended in bogey or worse, and this is likely due to a combination of a blind tee shot with a complicated flight requirement. It was a little force flex shot thrown down blind corridor and popping out at close to an OB line. If you didn't hit the gap, the rough could be devastating on the sides, and hole 16's tee shot was so hard that Ezra said when he found himself inbounds and in the fairway during the final round, it was at that point that he knew he could win the event. That shot alone was enough to keep him uncertain. Hole 16 was also a point of some controversy with a tee shot from Simon Lizotte. As the disc came out of the tunnel and flew towards the OB line, to do what so many others had done before by landing and skipping over the OB, returning to safety, both the cameraman and a scorekeeper found themselves in its direct path. In an effort to dodge the disc, the scorekeeper got his foot caught on the string, raising it at the exact time that Simon's drive was coming back in bounds. This prevented it from coming back in, and he was OB. Now, I'll say this about it. The timing of that specific circumstance definitely was an accident. That kid was told to basically hug the cameraman, and he tried to get out of the way as best he possibly could. Instead, rather than getting upset with the scorekeeper, I think we should be asking better questions about where we're placing cameras and staff in events. If we know the vast majority of drives that are going to make it out of the gap are going to have that kind of flight path, we need to post up in a slightly different place that will accomplish the same goals for both video and scorekeeping. And hopefully a lesson can be learned here for future designs. I would be remiss to not take a second and mention hole 13. I think that most of the MPO field could agree that this was their least favorite change to the course. Shortening the hole and changing it into a par 3 made it a very long and technical poke and hope style hole. Now, normally when you hear a pro say poke and hope, they might think it's fluky and you're like, they just didn't like it. But when you hear everyone in the field using that term, something is definitely wrong with the design of the hole. 68% of attempts on the hole led to par, and scoring separation wasn't very great. When asked about it, Paul McBeth said that it wasn't his design change idea, and it would be something that would be addressed in future to make sure it was a better hole. Still trying to figure out who the only FPO competitor to birdie hole 16 was? Last time I told you she was from Arkansas. Now I'll give you a little bit of a better hint. Her last Pro Tour win came in April of 2023. Figure it out yet? I'll hit you with the answer soon. Now, while it is just the first event of the year, perhaps it gives us some early insight into some players. So let's talk about a few overperformers and underperformers real quick. And let me clarify something. When I say under or overperform, it's not about if they played poor or very well, it's about how they played compared to expectations. If the person ranked 75th gets 78th place, it's not really an underperformance. Make sense? Let's get into it. Starting on the FPO side, my first underperformer is Emily Weatherman. Coming off of a very solid season with her first win, numerous top 10 performances, and a new contract with Innova, I thought that this was going to be a great time for her to display what we all saw in 2024. Even though she's not known for big distance, she is a very accurate thrower and has already played under pressure this year with the Tour Down Under, where she grabbed a win. It's a weaker field for sure, but still enough to shake off some rust. However, you wouldn't know that by looking at her first 2 rounds. In round 1, she only hit 43% of the fairways, was 11% in C1 in regulation, and finished with a score of 8 over par. And in round 2, she fixed the fairway issue slightly, but was still only 11% for C1 in regulation. And when you don't give yourself a chance to birdie, you often won't birdie. She cleaned it up in the final round with an 81% of fairways hit and 44% of C1 in regulation. I'm guessing this is just a case of early event nerves, but if she would have been able to copy and paste her third round into the first 2, she would have finished in 4th. And I think she'll clean it up this season, but the eyes will certainly be on her for sure. Speaking of having eyes on you, my other underperformer here is Missy Gannon. This was my biggest prediction miss for the weekend, and I had Missy coming in 3rd, not 15th. Typically, she's a very consistent player, but she just couldn't seem to get things going very early. She was actually only 6% in C1 in regulation during one of the rounds. She cleaned it up a bit, but her performance this past weekend could best be described as She'll likely get hers this season, though. I think we all know that's going to be coming. Now, hopping over to the MPO side, I've got 2 underperformers. Coming in 51st place, I've got Gavin Rathbun. Now, last year, he was able to finish 6th at chess.com. Personally, I think he's the most talented player in Prodigy's roster, so maybe there's some inherent pressure with that, or he's still not quite attuned to his new discs. He struggled to find C1 in regulation, going 28% in round 1, 17% in round 2, and 22% in round 3. I think this is an even bigger deal for him because he only missed 2 C1X putts all weekend. That means if he could have just gotten himself on the dance floor, he could have easily scored better. I think that he's going to bounce back from this big time, and personally, for my own season-wide bets, I think he's one of my sneaky picks for a big win this season. His performance, not so great, but it doesn't really change my mind on that opinion. My other underperformer is Niklas Antila. He has easily become one of the best players in the world, being third in last year's tour standings. He can be a bit streaky sometimes, but he has every natural ability needed to find success at Olympus. But despite that, he fell off from his 9th place finish last year to come in 45th this year. Sticking with MPO, let's talk about my big overperformer for the Supreme Flight Open. It has to be Jake Mon, who played just one heck of an event. I mean, last year he had some notable finishes in top 10 and top 20s. One of the main reasons he saw success this past weekend is that his putter almost never hit the ground. He was 47% from C2, but he was 96% from C1X. He's officially on watch going forward to see if this is just a blip on the radar or an indication of more to come. On the FPO side, my overperformer was obviously Macy Veladiaz. In 2024, she only played 5 sanctioned events, with only a couple being at a larger stage. She had to take time off to have a baby, so this was her first sanctioned event back. And you might not remember this, but she was a week-over-week threat to the FPO field in 2023. I think it's great to see that she hasn't lost a step and can put it down when it matters. She ended up leading the field in fewest bogeys, overall scramble rate, and clocked a very impressive 82% putting from C1X. While her third round fell off a little bit, I'm excited to see her compete this year and add another great competitor to the ever-improving FPO field. Speaking of the talented field, I think it's time to see if you got it right. The answer to our official question of who was the only FPO player to birdie hole 16 is Kat Mertsch. Did you get it right? Let me know in the comments. Now, while we don't have any Pro Tour disc golf happening this weekend, we do still have disc golf. Starting tomorrow, the first Go Throw Tour event is going down at the Hideaway in Terrell, Texas. Now, you may be asking yourself, how am I going to watch this? I can't find it on the PDGA website. This year, the Go Throw Tour will not be sanctioned and will not have live coverage that we're aware of. Instead, you'll be getting next day post-produced coverage on the Go Throw YouTube channel. And you can also go to their tour website to see, a new leaderboard and some interesting details about the events. Now, since we are a stats and analysis channel, not having the PDGA involved does mean we don't get PDGA stats, but don't you worry. It appears that UDisc is going to pick up the mantle here and do live event stats. So I'm really excited to see them back in the saddle for that. And also, don't worry, I'm going to make sure you get the best stats and analysis of both the Pro Tour and the Go Throw Tour this year. And for this first event, there are a few things to note. It's only 2 rounds, which turns the event kind of into a sprint more than a marathon. And secondly, there's going to be an MPO field of about 83 players, an FPO field of 9. And there are some notable names in those fields. The FPO sees the attendance of Allie Smith, Deanne Carey, Hannah Wynn, Kat Mertsch, Maria Oliva, and Rebecca Cox. Given this field, I can see Kat taking this down with Rebecca coming in second. On the MPO side, notable attendees like Adam Hammes, Austin Turner, Chandler Kramer, Chris Clemens, Gannon Burr, Gavin Babcock, Isaac Robinson, James Conrad, and Niklas Antila, and a bunch of other common Pro Tour figures. The big question is going to be if Gannon's going to play this event still, considering his posts about his hand and his neck. I think I'm going to give this one, though, to Isaac. I think he's going to take down the win this weekend. But that's all I have for the professionals this week. I want to take a moment to touch on the channel and some things that we're going to be doing this year. These first 2 weeks have been a massive learning curve for me. As you can obviously tell by the video, but we're starting to hit the stride a little bit. As of next week, we're going to be moving to our official release schedule, which is going to be Wednesdays at 5:30 p.m. During event weeks, we're going to continue to review the event like we did with the Supreme Flight Open, and we're going to make our predictions of who's going to win. On the off weeks like this one, we're going to review the Go Throw events if that's applicable and they're having them, but we're going to spend some time on special topics as well. We'll take time to look at things like specific stats and how well they can indicate success on the tour. We're going to get into season-long trends and notable player performances, and we're going to even do some deep dive episodes this year to examine things like player ratings, for example. You can get a better understanding of how it's calculated, what its purpose is, and the pros and cons with its design and how it's used. Is it the best way to track player performance? I'm also hoping to get some guests throughout the year. I'll be reaching out to various content creators and some pros within the space to see if they'd be willing to hop on and talk about the numbers a bit. Who would you like to see on the show? Finally, make sure you go and check out our Instagram, which you can find in the description down below. We're going to be posting daily content, including event reactions, giveaways, and maybe some Pro Tour trivia. If there's something specific you'd like to see, let me know in the comments. But that's it for today. Thank you again for watching. Please make sure to like the video and subscribe down below. It's super helpful. And until next time, have a great weekend.